you like it.
Good afternoon, members, officers, and any members of the public in the public gallery or viewing on the live stream. Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Graham Cone, and I am chairing this meeting. My vice chair is Councillor Stephen Drew, sitting to my right. I will introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed. By your presence here in the chamber and via video conference, you are deemed to have consented to being filmed and to the use of images and sound recordings for a webcast and archive recording. The normal procedure at Scrutiny and Overview Committee meetings is to review and make recommendations to Cabinet by affirmation. Only those members of the committee present in the chamber will be able to move and second motions or affirm. However, members present virtually may speak in the debate. May I ask those who are joining us remotely to ensure that their cameras and microphones remain off unless they are addressing the committee. For those of us present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the room. Finally, a report of this meeting will be presented to Cabinet at its meeting on the 3rd of December. Neither the Vice Chair nor myself will be able to attend this meeting, so is any other member of the committee able to attend that meeting? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm able to attend if you'd like.
Thank you very much for doing that for us. We'll note that. So we then go on to the agenda. So have we got any apologies for absence?
Got apologies from two committee members, Councillors James Hobro and Judith Rippeth, and also from Councillor John Williams, who's the Cabinet Member for Resources.
Thank you very much. So we then go on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from the committee? Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to remind the committee that I'm a board member of SCIP, South Cambridgeshire Investment Partnership, which does get a mention in the business plan. Thank you for that.
Councillor Bradnam.
Can I just ask, I'm assuming that members who have Gypsy and Traveller sites in their wards, as in item 7, do not need to declare an interest?
I wouldn't have thought so. No is what I'm going to say. Yeah. Thank you. Any other declarations of interest?
John Murphy appeared briefly on screen, so it's our monitoring officer. So he might have something to say on
John Murphy, did you want to comment at all on the declarations of interest?
You beat me to it, Chair. I was going to say the same as you did.
Lovely. Thanks very much. In that case, if there's no other declarations of interest, we'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 8. If you have a look through those, and if there's anything that you want to raise at all, please make that known. Councillor Bradnam.
I just wanted to point out that I took the summation of our decisions or our recommendations at the last Scrutiny and Overview meeting. Thank you very much to Ian Senior for providing us with a summary, and I took that to Cabinet this month.
Thank you very much for doing that, Councillor Bradnam. If there are no other issues with the minutes, we will move on to public questions. So we haven't had any public questions, so we'll move on to the next item, which is item 5, which is the Q2 performance report, pages 9 to 48. And we'll just open that up to questions straight away. Do any of the committee have questions on that? Councillor Ellington.
Thank you, Chair. On page 14, it talks about housing rent collected. but within the narrative, it talks about an increase it talks about over 500 residents have migrating from housing benefit to universal credit, and then goes on to talk about this means for people who are really possibly hard up to move from a weekly rent payment to a monthly rent payment. And I just wondered whether there was anything this council or the officer could suggest that we do to help mitigate that big step for people who are perhaps just moving up the ladder of getting a job or working for a bit. Thoughts?
Thank you, Councillor Ellington. Peter Maddox, do you want to come in on that? I don't know if we've got a... Yeah, so, yeah. Bridget, did you want to come in here first? Yeah, Bridget's online, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, so look, I think I do need the officers coming because it's quite a technical question, and I suspect that residents moving over to universal credit have no choice about it, but I'm going to have to get confirmation of that from the experts in the room, please.
Okay, Peter Maddox, please.
So, yes, Bridget, you are correct. You know, they have no choice. People are going over to universal credit in stages over a period of time. Now, clearly, if there are tenants that are struggling with rent payments, then we're happy to talk to them about making arrangements to make sure they don't get into difficulty. It is unfortunate that we've moved from this because there's always going to be a period where they aren't getting money and rent is going to then be due. So, you know, if any tenants are struggling to pay, do please talk to us at the earliest possible opportunity so we can sort this out. We are, you know, we're fairly confident over time as things settle down, you know, we will, you know, people will be okay, but it's just that short intervening period that potentially might present a difficulty for some tenants. So, yeah, please encourage them to talk to us if there's any particular issues.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ellington.
It's just that I'm quite aware that it won't just happen like that in a month, and that there'll be delays on it all happening, and it must be absolutely heart-wrenching for the people concerned. And I really feel for them, and if there's any more we can do, I think we should do it.
Agreed, we can certainly do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that at all, Bridget? Are you happy with that?
So I quite agree with Councillor Ellington. You know, people, you know, particularly people who are on lower incomes. You know, we know they're really struggling, and they're really struggling on many fronts. And actually, I think as a council, I think we are doing a tremendous amount, particularly through trying to identify people who might be eligible for benefits who aren't actually claiming them. So I'm confident that we're doing just about everything we can. But if anybody knows of more that we could do, then tell us, because we've actually resourced this well, and it's. You know, we're unusual as a council that we can resource this cost of living and this debt prevention work. A lot of other councils don't have the luxury of being able to do that. So we do everything we can. We don't want people falling into debt.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Did you want to come back on that at all, Councillor Ellington? Are you happy with that response?
I'm happy with that response. I do have another question.
So we'll come back to you, I think. We'll come back to you. So we've got Councillor Libby Earle.
Thank you. On page 18, AH211, this is a bit of an old chestnut and has been raised at every review of the KPIs probably for the last 18 months. And we've been consistently missing this target on reletting housing stock. And I think we by now know that 17 days is unrealistic, and it would be difficult for any landlord to relet housing stock given the variety of conditions that these houses are in when the council takes them over. The target is a stretch target. It's intended to be challenging. However, it is clearly unrealistic. And given the state of the properties that come in a variety of conditions, I'd like to propose to Cabinet that this target be revisited and revised to a more realistic timescale, and perhaps put that in line with the median of top quartile councils, so that we still have a challenging target, but it is something that the council can actually achieve, and we're not continually setting ourselves up to fail.
Thank you, Councillor Earl. I would be happy to second that as a recommendation, in that I also think these targets are, we've looked at these a number of times and they clearly are unrealistic. And I think if we had a benchmark of the best performing councils and tried to benchmark ourselves, that would be helpful. But John. Councillor Batchelor.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's precisely what we're doing. Up till now, we've been in a position where we can't change any of our key performance indicators because of the government's requirements for us to report all our performance indicators every week. So there was no prospect of actually being able to review any of those during that time. That situation has now changed, and we are working on this one in particular, but not only this one, all the KPIs are being reviewed, and in due course that we no doubt will come up with different targets. As areas where we need to stretch a bit more. And in this particular area, we certainly will be looking to tie this to the national performance of other similar councils, which we are consistently in the top quartile. So, yes, please do put the recommendation in. You're pushing an open door. We're happy to do it.
Fine.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that response. Councillor Libby Earl, did you want to raise anything else on that?
No, nothing else on this one, but I do have another question later.
Lovely. Okay. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Chair. My question has been kind of answered by the previous speakers to your question, Sue. So thank you anyway, but I'll come back later if I may.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bygott, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, I'd like to also support what Councillor Earl said earlier. I do think 17 days is unrealistic. So yeah, I think it's a very good point to make. So on page 14, it's the one just below the one that Councillor Ellington mentioned, FS 104. We've got a number of targets that have a sort of the target sort of moves around during the year, just because of the way these sort of things accumulate over the year. And I'd like to suggest that we move to some kind of seasonal adjustment method, where basically you add the current month to the previous 11 months, so that you've got like a moving window where you add over 12 consecutive months. And that enables you to have a smooth target that doesn't sort of change all the way through the year. But it means that you're, as 1 month, say November last year comes off, November this year comes on, and it just makes it an easier way to actually look at the target. But I was just going to ask maybe for a little bit more information about how the business rates operate, and do businesses operate on the council's financial year, or does each business have a different month that it has to do that in?
Lovely. Okay, I'll come to Councillor Bridget Smith in the first instance. So I think the first part, Councillor Smith, is a little bit about what Councillor Batchelor alluded to previously, in that we are reviewing the KPIs, and maybe some of that can be fed in. But if you'd like to comment on that.
Thank you. And I'm really pleased that Scrutiny are actually actually critiquing the KPIs. It's really helpful because we've obviously been kind of stuck with what we had during all of the 4-day week trial, and now we're not in that trial. There's opportunities for us to take a fresh look at it. And I took part in a workshop last night where we were really challenged about which KPIs do you think we have to go with, which ones could we actually ditch, which ones need to be reviewed. So this is very helpful. They have to be meaningful, and not just meaningful to experts like you, but they have to be meaningful to members of the public who might just be deciding to have a look as well. So very grateful for that. On the technical question about collections and so on, I'm going to have to ask for some help on that one, please.
Peter Maddox.
So that's, thank you for that. That's a good point, Councillor Bygott. I mean, what we do with the target here is at the start of the year, we roughly know when the cash is going to come in based on the profiles we already have. But what tends to happen during the year, those profiles will change, because if there's a change in circumstances, we then reprofile the payments going forward. And then, of course, the actual payments then don't necessarily mirror the profile target that we've got. So doing some work around re-looking at the target during the year, I think would be helpful. But clearly we haven't been able to do that because of the reasons already stated. In relation to business rates in particular, we do, or we know we have had a number of properties come online recently where we billed them, but we haven't had a chance to collect the money because the quarter has ended before we've set and processed the payment profile. So, for example, if we have a new assessment come online, I don't know, second half of September, that will feature as being an amount due, but we've not had a chance to collect it because we've literally just billed them. So that will affect the target, that will affect the actual as well. And that's one of the reasons why in September in particular, we're seeing it as red. That will eventually catch up as the payments are made, but at the point in time, the cut-off point at the end of September, it actually has created this issue. And again, looking at the target and perhaps reprofiling when payments are coming in is actually more realistic and would give us a clearer idea of where we actually are in reality.
Thank you. Councillor Bygott.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Lovely, thanks. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you very much. I actually put my hand up at the end of the conversation about, or the discussion about the point that Councillor Ellington raised. And what I just wanted to observe is that lots of people are moving onto universal credit in order that they achieve the winter fuel payment. So that's partly why the numbers of people going up, and that's right and proper that they're doing that. But there's also this element that housing benefit used to be paid directly to the landlord, and now it's paid to the tenant. And I'm sure the government had perfectly good reasons for doing that. But I just wonder, given that sometimes those people are the very most vulnerable people, I just wondered if we have any thought as a council of seeking a reversion to the previous arrangement. And I'm sure there might be pros and cons to that, but I just wondered if we could consider the merits of that change from where the payment lands. You know, not here, we don't have, but I just wondered if that's something we could look at, because it means that people who are already vulnerable and are having to juggle, you know, whether to turn the heating on and that sort of thing, they're also having to think about their rental. Whereas in the past, they didn't have that worry. It may be that people would rather have that worry and manage it themselves, but can we have a discussion about that somewhere along the line? But the actual substantive question I wanted to raise is the point about an amber item, which is on page 18, which is AH245, and that's the percentage of South Cambs District Council homes with active HHRS category 1 or 2 damp and mould cases. And the narrative explains that, you know, we're identifying properties that might be subject to this. But the narrative goes on to say that all cases at this time are treated the same. So it's amber at the moment, and we anticipate that the numbers will increase during the winter months and stabilise as we enter Q4. Now, what I'm concerned about is, are we identifying the worst cases, and are we, you know, because there are some where houses are not very well designed, and it might be, do we need to consider putting in a dehumidifier, for example? That might cost the tenant in their electricity bill to run it, but that might actually go a long way to making their homes more safer during that period when they're likely to get worse. So I just wondered what efforts are we taking to address the homes that suffer from damp and mould, and are we identifying those that are putting our tenants most at risk? And I know we've been doing a lot of work on this, but I wondered if we could get some clarification on that, please.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. I'll come over to Councillor Batchelor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a new performance category this year, and is based on the condition survey that we've carried out on all our properties this year. So we have identified all those, you know, so we're starting at the highest figure, if you like, because we've identified them and now we're working through them. We have a special team of people who do nothing else other than go and deal with damp and mould. It's certainly high on our agenda, and we are performing probably better than most in the country. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam.
So we're dealing with the worst ones worst, are we, Chair?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. And on my previous point, do we have any leverage about how, I know it's, you know, a big global thing, but do we have any leverage about whether, instead of it being housing benefit paid to the landlord, do we have any influence over whether the rental element can be paid to us as councils rather than to the tenant?
Councillor Bridget Smith, did you want to come in on that point?
Well, I was under the impression that's still an option, but I think I need to go to an officer of that. So I certainly always thought that there was discretion where people weren't, might not pass the money on, that it could go straight to the landlord, but that certainly was the case. So Peter, Peter probably knows.
Peter Maddox, do you want to comment on that?
Or Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff.
Just to explain, in a previous life I was a housing benefit manager, so I've got some understanding.
Yeah,
now,
no
unfortunately, the criteria are really strict. They include the tenant has to first be in 8 weeks arrears, already have other payments being paid direct. The DWP are not flexible about this at all. One of their, whether we agree with it or not, one of their objectives of universal credit is to move the management of all of the income to the claimant. It can be a real challenge, particularly for vulnerable people, and it often ends up with somebody getting to be 8 weeks in arrears, and then by the time the application's gone through and the process goes through, they end up being more like 12, 14 weeks in arrears before direct payment can start. But no, the DWP are very inflexible indeed about this.
Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. So did I understand you to say, thank you, Jeff, did I understand you to say that if somebody gets more than 8 weeks in arrears, then direct payment can be paid to the landlord, but by that time it gets to 12 and 13 weeks. So when people are clearly not managing, and that might be for all sorts of reasons, not their volition, that we as a landlord can receive that money directly?
We can, yes, but I'd say it has to be at least 8 weeks in arrears. By the time the process goes through, it is longer than that. And the arrears, the amount that gets paid to cover the arrears is very small indeed. So actually, although it will stop the applicant being in more debt for their rent anyway, it takes a very long time for that debt to be recovered in terms of their rent arrears.
Sorry, just to pursue the point, my actual point was, do we have any leverage with government to actually, no, I'm getting...
I think Peter Campbell might have the answer. He's sitting patiently with his hand up.
I'm sorry, my hand up was for the damper mould. Oh, wait.
Yeah. So
unless
Peter,
you want to come in that now, Graham. So just coming back to the point raised about the number of properties. So we do try and identify all properties with a damp or mould issue, albeit only the most serious ones are reported within this indicator. And the causes of those can vary significantly. So sometimes and this is why it gets worse over winter months, when the cause of the mould is quite often a lack of ventilation or a lack of heating in the property. So sometimes that's an issue that the tenants can sort out themselves. Sometimes it's that we have to do remedial work on the property and improve the insulation or heating, and sometimes a combination of them both. So there's a whole range of issues there.
lovely, thank you. Are we okay to move on, Councillor Bradnam?
Just coming back on the damp and mould one, what I asked was, are we identifying properties that are most likely to become worse over winter? And are we considering, for example, installing dehumidifiers just to assist them in properties that are difficult to ventilate properly?
Yeah, Peter Campbell.
Yes, of course. So the stock condition survey identified the properties with the most at risk, and we'll continue to inspect the other properties of a similar type. And there's a whole range of options available to us. So dehumidifier is not something that we would normally fit, but we look at increasing the insulation, improving the heating system, or fitting a positive air ventilation system, all of which are effective at curing mould.
Lovely, thanks very much. So we've got Councillor Heather Williams next.
Thank you, Chair. So on Appendix A, I think mainly around page 21, in the musculoskeletal conditions, in the breakdown, because obviously that's something that I think we're all quite mindful of when people are putting their bodies under a bit more stress in the way they're working in that department. It makes a distinction between non-work related and work-related musculoskeletal conditions. And I'm just wondering how we sort of make that distinction, because, okay, if you're out and about and you break your leg, obviously, and you're not at work, that's something you isn't. But there are other issues where it's the continued stress that then triggers, or you might have a weakness, but work contributes to it. So I'm just wondering, how is it possible to have a breakdown, or also probably comes staff employment, but it says about how a couple of people are on long-term sick and how that can skew the data. Just going back to the point on KPIs, whether it's worth separating that out so you can see if it's just a case of somebody's had a major injury, or whether actually there's increased number of people that are having that issues with, rather than just days off.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll come to Councillor Bridget Smith, I think, in the first.
Okay, so all I'm going to say on this is I think one has to be really cautious about honing down on data to the point at which people can be identified. So I'm just very mindful of that, but I think I would have to defer to Jeff Membry for the detail of this, because it's an completely operational matter, so not something that I know the detail of. But I do know we have to be cautious about identifying individuals.
Okay, Jeff Membry.
You're right, Leader. We do need to be careful about identifying individuals. I mean, what I can say is that actually short-term absence has actually reduced in the waste service by 31%, and it's 9 cases of long-term absence. I don't have at the moment before me the breakdown of whether the musculoskeletal conditions were, how many were work-related and how many were work-related. I have to ask the HR team to get some more information about that. But most of the long-term absence that we're finding is where people are waiting to access treatment from the NHS. And until they've got access to that treatment, obviously they can't get well, and we're not in a position where we can agree a return to work for them. But yeah, it's a hangover, we think, from people not getting necessarily the treatment they needed during the COVID period. And it's a trend that we're seeing nationally. Long-term absences are increasing across the board. But I don't have that breakdown at the moment, but I'll see if I can get that information for you.
Jeff Membry. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you. Would just be interested to see the work-related and non-work, if you're able to provide that. Yes, and then I've got questions on Appendix B when we get to that stage.
Yeah, okay. So we'll go Councillor Ellington.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to page 15, and several scrutinies ago, I asked about the average time for planning applications and was told that, including validation, it was not more than 8 weeks. But now we have a KPI which says from after validation, it's less than 8 weeks or around 8 weeks. So how long does validation take? That's the key. That's what a lot of individuals who put in planning permission moan at me about, you know. So please, can we have a KPI that says how long validation takes?
Lovely. Councillor Bridget Smith.
Right. Yes. So, I mean, this is all part of the work that we're currently embarking on KPIs. So, you know, we must input that into the analysis we're doing, and we'll hopefully come up with something that really represents what members want and which is useful.
Thanks very much, Leader. Stephen Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I can't log in on my device. We already have an indicator about how long validation takes. It's between 1 and 2 days at this moment in time. The indicator that you see reported here is an indicator about valid applications that are determined, because the clock on the start date for a planning application does not start until it is determined legally valid. And so it may well be a terminology piece, but that is the total time it's taken to determine a valid application is the indicator you've got. We've got separate measures. Unfortunately, I can't pull it up for you. I could pull it up for you live if I had my own laptop on the number of days it takes us to validate a planning application, but it depends on the time. But for households, generally a day or 2 now.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Ellington.
Well, I was impressed before, but it was when it came up here saying from validation, I suddenly felt concerned that maybe there was another issue underpinning it, because it is something that residents will moan about if they're put in an application, they haven't heard anything, and we need to keep an eye on that one. Thank you.
Noted. Okay, Councillor Libby Earle.
Councillor Bradnam actually asked my question, so it was about mould, don't worry.
No problem, no problem.
That's
Thank
fine.
you for that. Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. If you will, I've got a few questions. Well, it's more comments on Appendix A, but more on Appendix B. Are we ready to move into Appendix B?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
And then I've got actually 6 points, but they're probably quite brief. So yeah. Just on Appendix A then, we've talked quite a lot about representation of data. I know there's a discussion going on in the background about KPIs and how we present them.
But I just wanted to make a few comments on, what's present here. And first of all, I think Councillor Bygott mentioned the notion of a moving average, which kind of illustrates one of the sort of techniques that we might be able to use. For example, if there's seasonal variation, to pick out the seasonal variation, to pick out an annual variation. And I think we occasionally get troubled by the spikes or the outliers in the data, which I think there should be a convention. So here's just a suggestion that an outlier should be explained, but a seasonal variation we might understand to be a seasonal variation. So there are one or two, and I just look at the residual black bin waste per household, which is ES412, where there isn't a line chart because the difference between the actual and the target is very small, but actually as a number, it's significant. So I think this is a clear case where we could plot the error, the difference between the actual and the target, and that's a smaller number which is easily accessible. So that's a comment, and I think perhaps some of the other thoughts I've got in that area I can write up in a note and send to Kevin Ledger, but I'm happy to do that. But there were just a few things that stood out. So if you'll allow me to go off, wandering off into Appendix B.
Okay.
So first of all, page 23 and item 1, which is support businesses to be growing up in the South Cambridgeshire area. A kind of reassurance here, or I'd be interested in a reassurance that local businesses with respect to new developments get a look in. So when, for example, local developments are looking for retail businesses, that local businesses we support and mentor in such a way that they can qualify to, for example, open a retail unit on Darwin Green or on in Eddington or whatever. So that's my first. Second, getting, and I'm referring now to page 25 and page 25, getting the economically inactive back into work. There are all sorts of relationships discussed here. We are using our partners or working with our partners. Now, that's one of the things that the peer review panel presented to us or said to us. We should be resetting our partnerships. I'm just wondering how that's working here. How are our partnerships proving to be effective? I'm just going to skip one because I think I can refer that elsewhere.
Shall we take those 2 points for Councillor Smith first, just so, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay for another couple of points. Councillor Smith.
So I'm sorry, my internet cut out for some of that, so I lost sound for a bit. So it's about essentially the effectiveness of our business support service. Is that?
Leader, let me just recap. The first one was, are we giving the best opportunity for local businesses to participate in, for example, the retail opportunities in our newer developments?
Yeah, okay.
Well, Waterbeach is some way off, but Darwin Green and Eddington and so on. And secondly, how are our partnerships working out with regard to getting the economically inactive back into work? Are those partnerships being?
Oh, okay, right. Okay, sorry, I did mishear that. So look, so on the second one, that really sits with the combined authority. So they're doing some very interesting targeted work on getting people back into the workplace. They have a vast amount of devolved funding on skills. And I can't remember all the details of it, but say that's the combined authorities principle. It's a really important responsibility of the combined authority. In relation to giving local businesses opportunities within our new developments, that's an interesting one because the kind of cop-out answer is that the market will just work it out for itself. But I'm pretty sure that we do have regular engagement, particularly with all the big supermarket chains. But I can't tell you the details of it. But I know that work goes on behind the scenes. And certainly, you know, I went for a walk around Northstowe a couple of days ago, and certainly the team there are constantly talking to whoever. Well, they're talking to loads of people about businesses, about, you know, who might move into all the business presence, businesses there, the shops, the enterprise zone, and so on. So I think there's a lot of behind the scene work goes on. I'm quite confident in it, but I don't know if there's anybody who'd like to add a bit of detail to that. Marvellous, exactly the right person.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely, as Councillor Smith has outlined, we are very, very keen to support local businesses to connect to local opportunities, and we have lots of meetings with local businesses about what their offer might be, how they might be seeking to expand, and what those opportunities therefore might be across the district, and how we can link those together. Sometimes the timing of that isn't always quite right. There might be an opportunity coming down the line. So we keep that on file. We have those conversations with them. And what I would say is if members are aware of local businesses who have plans to expand or develop or move perhaps, please do make us aware. Quite a lot of the inquiries that we deal with and that we follow up do come through members. And that is a really interesting, exciting part of what we're looking to achieve. We recognise that many of our local businesses, they are embedded in our communities and they want to contribute, not just as a business, but also to that community. And we see so many examples of that. So wherever we can help support them to grow and develop and link them into those local opportunities, we will absolutely seek to do so.
Lovely. Councillor Stobart.
Well, just a reaction to those 2 points of feedback, I think great, and maybe parish councils, well, they're in the domain of the members. So members working with parish councils, finding emerging businesses who might be interested, I think that's definitely falls within the member remit. So I think that's a very good point. Yeah. Can I just raise my other questions?
You've got one more, yeah?
I've got 3 more.
I'll come back to you.
Don't forget.
And you can do your next 3. Yeah, go you and then, yeah. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. So we're on to Appendix B, and it's nice that somebody's got more questions than me. That's always a nice thing to happen in meetings. Thank you, Councillor Stobart. 2 things really. One, page 32, in relation to TPOs. When this is being looked at, will this also include the fact that we don't currently have a scheme of delegation for TPOs? Because that's something I've had sort of come across as a bit of an issue recently, in that I've put in an application. I know as a planning committee member, we've had some come to us, some not. So in order to make sure there's consistency, and bear in mind this TPO took 9 months to come to some conclusion, the fact that there wasn't a scheme of delegation, I don't think then helps with dealing with what happens when decisions are being brought to a conclusion. So can we have some reassurance that that is going to be part of what's looked at? Because if we're not delegating to officers a function and a power, that then obviously makes it hard for them to implement that function, but also makes it odd when some comes to us and some doesn't. You wonder how that decision process is made. The other question was just in relation to, we had at the other budget, so the issue to do with the contracts to do with refuse, just making sure that that's been finalised and dealt with, as it's one of the parts later on in the agenda, and making sure that we're not in a situation again, because obviously that was a significant sum above budget.
I'll come to Councillor Bridget Smith.
So I thought, but I'm going to have to defer to Stephen Kelly about this, I thought officers did have delegated authority to issue TPOs, because I'm sure Stephen signed one off recently, and that, like planning, only tricky ones come to the planning committee. But I seem to be wrong on a lot of things this evening. I might be corrected on this as well.
It's no problem. Shall I bring Stephen Kelly in on this?
Happy to comment, Chair. Yeah, the scheme of delegation, the scheme of delegation is quite limited in terms of the level of detail that it provides. Our practice has been that where we have a request for a TPO to be imposed, it's not actually an application under the Town and Country Planning Act for works to a tree, and it therefore is a matter of officers to resolve whether or not the TPO should be put on. I think this particular case has probably prompted more interest because of the nature of the matter than other cases which we get quite regularly for people requesting TPOs. There is a project ongoing in the Shared Planning Service at the moment to review all of the processes and systems associated with the management of trees. It's part of our ongoing programme of system-wide improvements across the service. And indeed, specifically in respect to the scheme of delegation, the Planning Committee working group that has been running for some time now, and it concluded its reports to planning committees recently with a recommendation that we update and refine for transparency reasons as much as for efficiency, the scheme of delegations that are presented to not just this council but to the Joint Development Control Committee and for the City Planning Committee. And you will, the planning committees, we hope will see those in January, for mandating by the planning committees themselves, because those areas of ambiguity, I think, helpfully, as Councillor Williams highlighted, could do with some clarification.
Yeah. On your second point, Councillor Williams, do you just remind us of your second point, and then I'll come back to Bridget Smith.
It comes in relation to the waste management, because obviously the contract came to an end, was renegotiated and came in at quite a high sum. So just wondering what safeguards are in place to ensure that doesn't happen again.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
I can't answer that. I'll have to defer. Again, it's an operational matter. I have to defer to the officer.
Yeah. Shall I bring in Peter Maddox?
I mean, obviously, Bode would be able to answer this better, but the MRF contract, prices we had originally were very good. So I think we've always expected to see some sort of an increase. I think everybody was potentially surprised by the level of that increase. We have included that within our medium-term financial strategy. So as regards that, we've made sure that we've included that within our financial planning. I don't think anybody really foresaw how big the increase would be. And I think it's probably something we need to reflect on. And, I think we've done everything we possibly could to mitigate the impact of it. But, I mean, it's probably worth reviewing the process just to make sure that that is, in fact, the case.
Yeah. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just on this one, the MRF, because it's something that we raised at the budget meeting, sort of February time. And I do appreciate the issue was that the negotiations hadn't come in, and so people weren't sure what it was. I mean, the increase was not quite £1 million, but it was quite hefty on some councils. I'm not sure where our council was. So, like Huntingdon, they made a provision in their accounts, I think it was £900,000. We obviously raised that at council and we hadn't put a provision in. So it's how do we make sure that that's quite a lot outside of budget to then bring in, and just contracts naturally will come up, and like I say, it was foreseeable there'd be an increase. Just a request to kind of make sure that if we know these things are happening, to make provisions for them in future. Appreciate provisions sometimes are wrong, and you can't, it's not an exact science, like any budget's not an exact science, but I do feel there should have been a provision, as I mentioned back in February.
Peter Maddox, do you want to come back on that?
At the time that we were talking about this, when we were doing our medium-term financial strategy, we hadn't really got a figure that we could put in, and I know you're correct, Huntington did put a figure in. I don't know that there was much of a basis behind that. Having said that, things have moved on. We have now factored that in. It's always difficult to include numbers in a medium-term financial strategy when you've got a little idea of what you're going to put in. But where we have got enough information and enough certainty, then I think that is the right course of action. So I believe there's a report coming to Cabinet shortly to update everybody on this. The figure that's been put in the medium-term financial strategy is 1.1 million, so quite a significant sum. But I say there's a report coming through the Cabinet, I believe, probably the next Cabinet, to update on the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Drew.
Excellent. Before I start the question I want to ask, can I just ask, I will ask Councillor Smith in the first instance, I assume, but she may defer to others. Roughly how many full-time equivalent employees does the council currently have?
Oh, I think it's about 630, but Jeff Membry, I'm sure, has got the exact number at his fingertips.
That's close enough, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm afraid I don't have the exact figure.
So we'll go into sort of 680, 700 region. Okay, that's fine.
It's quite a lot.
That's fine. Okay, I wanted to refer to page 19, FS 117, which is percentage staff turnover. It is noticeable that obviously in the, if we sort of take out the COVID spikes of up and downness, as it were, and then we go from 2022 to 2023, it seems to be an average of around about 3.5% or so. There's a couple of months where it's more like 4, a bit when it's 3.25. So we call it that period of roughly 3.5%. So if we are around 3.5% at that point, it means that we are losing somewhere around 25 employees. So if we go on kind of maths at that point. And then we look for that period 2023, 2024. Again, if we call it about the same kind of length of period, we seem to be losing an average of around about 2% or so of employees. Again, sometimes slightly above, sometimes slightly below. It's probably slightly over 2%, but if we call it 2% for simplicity. So therefore, we're losing around 14 employees. So therefore, in that period where we can see very clearly on the graph on the bar line that it is reduced, we are running with approximately about 11 employees fewer leaving per quarter. Yes? Okay. Now, one of the things that's always very, very clear when you listen to experts in the world of business is that something that employers don't necessarily consider very brilliantly is the cost of replacing staff. And there are huge academic traits in relation to this, and governments even publish specific things. For instance, the US Bureau of Labour estimates that the cost of replacing an employee is about 40% of their annual salary. You will read other papers where professors will talk about it being 1.5 times an employee's salary. Some people will say it is 1 times. Some people will say it is a specific figure. And these figures are usually accounted for people who are earning perhaps somewhere in the sort of £25,000, £30,000 or so a year, which is why I asked about full-time equivalent. So what I wanted to ask the leader is, in the council's work and recognising what's in that staff turnover chart, does the leader have any comment to make on the fact that we appear to have significantly reduced our staff turnover, and that just the literal action of having to replace a staff member has a cost that is in tens of thousands of pounds, and therefore that graph on its own seems to me to show a significant saving in the council's work? Any thoughts, leader?
Thank you, Councillor Drew. What interests me about that graph is that it's been flat for quite a while, whereas it was zipping around all over the place. So I think what we can probably say is our staff turnover is much more predictable. Now, you in your professional capacity as a leader within education knows that it's some churn is perfectly healthy in staff. You don't want an organisation where the same people stay forever and ever. So it would be concerning if there wasn't some turnover there. But you're absolutely right. There is, it costs an awful lot to advertise for new people, to cover their roles between somebody leaving and a new person arriving. You're also very well versed with the challenges of, an expensive area like South Cambridgeshire of recruiting the workforce that we need, because it's a highly competitive market. We have demonstrated as part of our 4-day week trial savings of £250,000, which are largely attributable to us not needing so many agency staff, and associated with that, there are undoubtedly savings to do with the fact that we're not having to advertise jobs. And we were advertising jobs and getting no applicants. So I remember, it must be 2 years ago now, I think we advertised for 2 ecology officers, which is my idea of the dream job, planting trees and looking at lovely green stuff. And I don't think we got an applicant. And that was for a lovely job. It was really, really challenging. Now we've seen a 53% increase in applicants for jobs on average, and an improvement in the calibre of people applying. So it's a bit of a win-win all round, financially, and as far as our colleagues who are, saving us money and increasing our productivity.
Okay, lovely, thank you. If I could just follow up slightly on that, for which you may wish to turn to one of the officers, because I'm now going to be very technical. Has the cost savings, which are a recognised business reality in terms of there is a cost that is known by all business world to replacing a member of staff, has the specific amount that can be measured and estimated and measured that it costs to replace a member of staff in relation to their impact on the business by leaving, has that been included within the financial assessment for the impact of the 4-day week on the council's finances?
Now, I'm not sure we've gone into that level of detail, and I'll probably have to ask Jeff Membry that. But of course, there isn't just a single cost to recruiting a member of staff. It costs an awful lot to recruit chief executives. It costs less to recruit other people. So it might be a figure that we can't get, but I will have to ask Jeff Membry, if I may, Chair, to talk about what analysis we've done on this.
Agreed. Jeff Membry.
The leader's absolutely right. We did start looking at this, but there's huge variations depending upon the type of role that you're looking at. For an administrative role, a fairly basic role, when you start looking at the total costs of recruitment, including advertising costs, the time of the panel, etc., the cost is around about £4,000 for a very basic. But for a senior role, it is often in the tens of thousands of pounds. And it does vary depending upon whether you use recruitment agencies or whether you recruit direct. So we couldn't be confident that we could come up with an accurate figure, and we wanted to ensure that we only put fully accurate figures in the report. So we haven't done that calculation. But it certainly, you look at that range, you're starting at around about a £4,000 cost for a very basic role.
So before I move on to the next question, I would therefore just like to make a comment which the leader may or may not want to agree with. That suggests to me that the figures that are being published in relation to the savings the council is claiming in relation to the 4-day week could actually, in regard of the cost of recruitment, be seen as quite conservative and not actually including the full savings that are being made. So therefore, when we're having conversations about the impact of the 4-day week and the finance of the council, this perhaps is an example of where all of the savings and all of the efficiencies are not actually being claimed in public.
So I think you're quite right, Councillor Drew. I think that is indeed the case. But we had to work with the KPIs we had, and as I said earlier, we were kind of sort of lumbered with those KPIs. We know that there were other benefits which we weren't monitoring. We know that there were other roles that had been hard to fill roles which we filled during the course of the trial that actually which we weren't factoring in as well. So given our time again, we would have been. We would have been looking at more information and the impact on more roles, but we had to run with what we had. But you are quite right.
Okay, marvellous, thank you. I'm just going to do a second question now, and then I will hand over, because I know Councillor Stobart very kindly made sure he didn't do all 6 of his straight away. If I can just turn us to page 18, SH332, emergency repairs within 24 hours. I note, and apologies if I've counted this incorrectly, but I believe that we are now in something in the region of about the 22nd, maybe 21st, 20th month, or whatever it might be, of having 100% of emergency repairs within 24 hours being achieved. Now, I've asked questions about this before, and we've had to explain what that means. I just really wanted to ask if we are now at a stage where we believe that responding to tenants within 24 hours for their emergency repairs is the norm in terms of the service that residents and tenants can expect from South Cambs.
Chair, do you want me to come in first of all? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to have to ask Peter Campbell about the, how we relate in relation to other councils. Personally, I think it's jolly good, but then an emergency is an emergency. And, if you rock up at A&E, as I did the other night, actually, I was jolly glad to be seen within 15 minutes and out of the place in less than 3 hours. So, these things are emergencies to people. And I think the time, the 24-hour time frame is very, I think it's what our residents expect. I kind of suspect we're doing rather better than other people, but I'm sure Peter has that information.
Yes, so it is the norm for us dealing with emergencies, and in many cases, indeed, it's quicker than 24 hours. And quite often, some of the delay is, it's quite surprising how many people have an emergency repair, but don't want it carrying out until a time that's convenient for them. So yes, it is the norm, but I think it's important that it's kept as an indicator to recognise that we are taking the more serious repairs very seriously and performing so very well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Heatherwoods, do you have a point on this? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Drew, for sparking a piece of casework that was in my memory there. So there you go. One thing, you're completely right, emergencies, they are important to individuals, and so actually if you get those wrong, you're going to have much more repercussions of satisfaction as well. But I think we also need to be clear as to what an emergency is, because I had a piece of casework where I had a lady in her 90s that the heating had broke down, but heating was not classed as an emergency. And I thank Mr. Campbell for helping us deal with that, but originally got in touch and Mears went, now a 90-year-old at this time of year with no heating, I would class that as an emergency, and probably most people in the room would, but for the terms of the contract, it wasn't. So I completely agree, but I think also we need to look at what an emergency is.
Peter Campbell, did you want to comment on that at all?
That's, of course, is within the remit of what if members want to look at that. So, yes, you're right. Emergency is an emergency, and it's quite often about making good. So, for example, a broken window would be an emergency.
Okay.
But the response will be to board up rather than to replace the glazing, etc. What we can do, if it would help the members, is to circulate via Ian a list of what constitutes an emergency for the minutes.
I think that would be helpful, and then maybe we can come back and look at that as a committee. Thank you very much for that, Peter Campbell. Councillor Bradham, is it on this point? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, through you, Chair, Mr. Campbell, it's a good point that Councillor Williams makes, and I'm sure my impression is that although it wouldn't come under the contract perhaps, and you're right to ask the question about what is an emergency, I'm sure the triage system would determine whether in that circumstance whatever had happened constituted an emergency. And that appears to be what indeed has happened in this case, because as you said, they did go and visit quickly because they recognised that a lady in her 90s.
Yeah, if I can clarify, that's actually not what happened. The resident got in touch, was told, no, we don't class heating as an emergency. She then got in touch with myself, and I got in touch with Peter. She'd been told no, and that's my point. Obviously, she knows who I am and was able to do that. Okay. Not everyone does.
Williams, what I was asking was whether there is any triage, and it's sounding as if there isn't, so I'm just wondering if we need to ask if there should be.
Yeah, I think we'll take this away, and Ian will circulate that amongst the committee, and we'll bring that back to have a look at. So thank you for that. Thank you both for that. We'll go back to Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So if I could draw your attention to the middle of page 30, and it's this, this is entitled, it's under 5, section C and subsection 5, Latin 5, as East-West Rail progresses, etc. So, of course, this was an auspicious day for East-West Rail, and the non-statutory consultation was announced with a great fanfare. And so there's a lot of discussion going on now because the precise route selection has been made and so on. So I'm not going to dwell on that. It's more on the way in which we've represented the interests of our various residents, you know, according to where we are in the district. That's been a very different reaction. And as, in fact, as the point mentions, ensuring that they, that is the residents, are well represented in securing all possible mitigations. First of all, are we confident we're really stepping up to this, and what are we learning from the process? Because, you know, here we are with a big infrastructure thing, and that's quite new to us. We haven't seen such a big infrastructure project for some time, but new ones, more are coming up, and are we well prepared for them?
Lovely.
So that's my first one.
Yeah,
right?
let's take that. Bridget Smith, let's
Thank you. So look, I mean, I think we are as well prepared as any council because, you know, we are the focus of government for growth, and this new government is all about growth. So I think we are really well prepared and we are really well resourced. I was in a meeting earlier with Stephen Kelly where he was explaining that, you know, we've got one of the biggest planning teams in the whole of the UK. Very, you know, with a huge range of skills there. So I think we are in a very, very good position. Sorry, I've got a dog with a squeaky toy you might be able to hear. So I am confident we are well resourced. We've also had a lot of time to prepare for this. And we are part of a lot of sort of key strategic partnerships. So we know we're not in this alone. You know, we're working very closely with Cambridge City. We have the Greater Cambridge Partnership. We have the Combined Authority. We also have this, obviously, this new growth body which government's setting up. So, you know, we are part of numerous partnerships whose voices will be heard loud and clear. So it's not as if we're in this alone. So I think we are well prepared and well resourced, and we will make sure that you know, the most important thing is that we make sure that within the consultation, we reflect the concerns of our residents, and as well as allowing them to, you know, input their own concerns as well. I think I'm going to strangle this dog, but no, I won't really. I will just take the toy away.
Thank you very much. Stephen Kelly, did you want to come back very quickly on that, or you? Yeah.
Just very briefly to highlight that actually the shared planning service, because we've had the A14, the A428 wastewater treatment works, we've got a solar farm that's coming on at the moment. We've got quite a bit of experience, probably almost one of the most experienced teams in the country around development consent orders in a local planning authority. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. There's a massive amount of information, but you also have a team of ecology, landscape, and so forth specialists. So we'll certainly aim to do our very best to make sure that we hear and then can reflect the concerns and understand what they mean for the project.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stobart, your second point.
Well, could I just comment on that? Because those answers are great, and but I think, you know, the earlier we do engage residents, because residents do have a lot to offer, but if we can actually bring all that stuff together, because combining those ideas actually teases out the key points. So I think, yeah, we have the professional expertise, but we, yeah, need to listen to those voices and bring them together.
Agreed.
So my second point. So page 32, and just at the top of page 32, so just briefly about water. And I've mentioned this before, water neutrality schemes. So in respect of small developments that can first of all, you know, by their nature, have low water consumption because they're modern and because they have all the right stuff. But by working with the local community and actually engaging the local community and using water saving measures, you know, where there is an existing community that's using water, of course. So what's the scope of water neutrality schemes in the district on maybe a small scale, but still an effective one, and provides us with data points on water consumption, for example?
Quite a big question for Councillor Smith.
You know, you keep asking me these terribly technical questions, which I wouldn't even try to answer. So I'm going to have to go to Stephen. I'm sorry about that. I'll just embarrass myself if I try and answer that.
That's counts. Stephen Kelly.
Thank you. Well, it so happens I've been in a meeting of the Water Scarcity Group just before coming to this meeting. There are a number of work streams, including nature-based solutions, recovery and pilot work projects that are ongoing around that. There is work ongoing about retrofit and the ability to accelerate retrofit of homes and bring forward measures for things like water credits to help demand management, but also to invest further in water. There isn't currently a water neutral. The issue of water neutrality is being explored through the Water Resource Management Plan process and with the water resources, with the Water Scarcity Group. But delivering water neutrality requires a degree of scale and a significant design process in order to be able to achieve it. That doesn't mean that we're not looking to try and optimise and maximise the efficiency of water usage. And on some schemes, as you know, there are regulatory barriers to the delivery of some of those water neutral objectives, including the Water Framework Directive and the requirements for water quality in all schemes, which have impacted, for example, the ability of Eddington to be able to utilise fully its water recycling facilities. So there's a significant body of work. As I said, all of the water industry plus regulators and indeed neighbouring water companies were in this meeting earlier on together with DEFRA and the Environment Agency. We haven't got there yet, but there is certainly a lot of energy being devoted to it.
Okay. Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, and yeah, great answer. If we were to continue to push on that, I mean, we should be seeing exemplar developments. In discussion with Eddington at JDCC, you know, we did actually underline the exemplar nature of some of these projects, but there's technical and statutory background to this, which I think we need to bear in mind. But the more we can do to bring these projects forward, the better. So my last point was page 33, and carbon reduction, decarbonising the council's estate and operations. It was a simple question. To what extent can we put pressure on our suppliers to decarbonise?
Councillor Bridget Smith.
So on our own suppliers, this through procurement, you mean? Yeah. So we do. So part of the procurement scoring is to take into consideration climate change and environmental factors. So it's part of our scoring as part of our procurement. Our procurement work, so absolutely, you know, and then we run lots of workshops out of the business support team, supporting all businesses in South Cambridgeshire to decarbonise, to do more. On top of which, the combined authority is doing quite a lot as well. So it's more than chipping away. I think we're actively pursuing this, and when I mean, when the corporate peer challenge people came and they asked people, you know, what they thought of us, the green to our core came across, you know, widely outside of the organisation. So people wanting to do business with us know that we, you know, we have the very, very strongest green credentials, and that our expectations are that people we are procuring with, people we are working with, do as well. So I think we're doing a good job of it, but very happy to, you know, review further to see if we can do whether we can do more.
Thank you.
Finances, Chair, thank you very much.
Lovely. Councillor Ellington.
Right, I'm sorry to come back again.
That's okay.
But on the other hand, within your business plan, there is a lot about climate change, which I applaud. But one of the things I feel you are not addressing is the issue around flooding. We've talked about water scarcity, but as we experienced only last month, water flooding is another key factor in climate change. And I live in the bit of the district that is a bit below sea level. And what I'm asking is whether it's possible for this council to regularly give information to our drainage manager about applications which are anywhere near any of the flood areas. At the moment, I find myself informing our drainage manager if there is a development, for example, in Swavesey of 70 houses which are going to drain into our awarded drains. And that has significant implications for our drainage service. But it's not a statutory requirement for them to be consulted. And I would just like this council to think that they should put that on their list of asking our drainage managers.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
I'm very happy to take that away as a suggestion and have a look at it. Thank you.
Stephen Kelly, very briefly.
Just very briefly, I think we do actually consult on major developments, the drainage team, so I can ask for clarification on that. And
that would be helpful. Lovely, thank you for that. Councillor Drew.
Thank you. Thank you. If I can just go to page 22, please, which is all the things about the call centre and such like. Again, I just wanted to ask a question about rough kind of numbers in terms of calls to the contact centre. Do we have roughly how many calls to the contact centre are made each month? Do we have a kind of, I know again you kind of move around, but do we have a sort of ballpark figure for what that is?
Shall I bring Jeff Membry in here?
Please,
okay?
please do. Yes, please, because it's thousands.
Know the answer to that question immediately. It's very disappointing.
Very high expectations.
I know, absolutely.
Jeff Membry.
Yeah, again, it does vary quite considerably. We tend to get between 300 and 600 calls a day. Okay. So depending upon the number of days in the month, so it's quite a significant number of calls.
Okay, great, thank you. So we are looking at something that we're talking sort of 15,000, those kind of things from there. Okay, so if I can just first of all go to CC 303 on page 22, where I noticed that we are sitting at around 95% for, I don't know, sort of 12, 14 months or so we seem to be sitting. I know there was a little wobble at some point about 6 months ago, but it stays roughly in the same area. And I just wondered if kind of twofold really. One is we seem to be sitting at 95%, and whilst obviously the target is 90, and we don't wish to be churlish in terms of this is great work, I often think to myself that once we kind of achieve what might be called a sort of standard expectation, I just wondered, first of all, Councillor Smith, if there was any thought about what work or what can be done in order to potentially go beyond that 95% in the light of the work that we are doing as a council.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So that's a really helpful question. So you might remember when these were always red, and and very, very red indeed. And it was, I mean, it was just the norm that all the kind of contact centre stuff, we're not reaching targets. So this is incredibly encouraging, and it's kind of there's multiple factors contribute to this. So Jeff Membry has been leading a really, really ambitious transformation program. I think which has transformed the customer experience as far as the contact centre is concerned. And we're absolutely not resting on our laurels, because you might be aware that we soft launched web chat quite recently, and now that is now being taken over by an AI client called Sam, I think. And I think some of our members are actually trying to break Sam, try and find out where the glitches are. So I think we are constantly looking to improve it. It'd be very easy to say, well, actually, good enough is good enough. But if you are, one of those small percentages of people whose call hasn't been answered or who hasn't got resolution, then actually your experience of the council is going to be negative. And it doesn't make any difference to you that 95% of people have had a satisfactory outcome. So we've absolutely got to be aiming for 100%. And I'm very confident that this improvement journey is an ongoing improvement journey, and that 100% is our target. But all credit to Jeff and his team for turning around something that really seemed to be an oil tanker and almost impossible to turn round.
Did you want to come in as well, Jeff? Or I think we've got a fairly clear answer.
Yes, thank you. We do indeed continue to work to try and improve the figures in the contact centre. I get daily performance reports from the contact centre telling me how they did just the day before. We get, after that, say thank you to colleagues in leadership team whose services now provide the contact centre with advance warnings of mailings, volumes, etc., so that we can plan to scale our resources to be available when we know that a lot of contacts going to hit out there. And the other thing is,
just briefly, Jeff,
yeah. Well, the leaders mentioned that we've gone live with AI Assistant on web chat. The next step is AI Assistant for voice, which we're looking to have operational by the end of the year, and that will answer 100% on time.
Lovely.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll just go to CC305, which is also on page 22. It's 2 charts up, as it were. Percentage of formal complaints resolved within time scale. Obviously, above target of 80, significant above the target, nowhere near the intervention, green, really positive in that regard. I just wondered if some information can be provided on, is there a particular type of complaint that we are not resolving in timescale? Because if I go back to 2023, I can see that although there was the excellent 96% for the previous quarter, obviously it kind of goes in that sort of range of 90 to 93 as a kind of general rule. I just wondered if there was any specific type of complaint that we are generally not managing to resolve within timescale, or if that is just not the way it is and it's just a random thing.
Councillor Bridget Smith.
So I suspect it's planning, because planning issues can be really, really tricky. So I suspect it's planning, but I'm going to have to ask somebody to confirm or deny that.
Lovely. Jeff Membry, did you want to confirm or deny that?
I think it is complex cases that often involve more than one officer and more than one service. That can be planning, but it can be other services as well. A more detailed report on complaints does go to the audit committee once a year, so I can ask for that information to be dug out and circulated.
And if I can just then just follow that up then with a thought, which I'm sure you kind of if we know that we are generally not managed, it's probably unfair. If we know that the cases the complaint cases that tend not to be met within the timescale are ones that involve a complexity of ranges of services and officers. If I am a resident and I make a complaint, I don't differentiate in my mind between a complaint that is just about one service and maybe one thing, and the fact that because of the way the council has chosen to organise itself, entirely rationally, that my complaint goes across different sections of the service. So I wonder whether or not the council ought to be thinking about the fact that the way in which complaints are dealt with may not be entirely efficient and fair if the complaint happens to be complex and across a number of services. Because as a resident, I kind of expect my complaint to be dealt with as efficiently, however simple or complex it is. I don't know if that's an area of work that you've looked into or could consider.
Yes, indeed, and without wanting to sound like I'm give technical solutions to everything, we are indeed bringing in a revised complaints system which will prompt early if targets aren't being met, so that we'll get a heads up that potentially we're not going to meet a target, so that we can act to intervene and make sure that target's met.
Lovely, thanks very much. So we have no other speakers on this item. So, sorry, Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Chair. And it's through you, and it's actually in your gift, actually, this one. We've heard some really nice things tonight about the contact centre, which is essentially our front door to everything we do here. And when you look at these graphs here, they don't half look pretty positive. And I just wonder whether it would be something this committee could actually say, given any of the comments and the solutions we may have put forward this evening, but actually we underline the fabulous work that the entire team are doing under Jeff. I really think this is quite important, actually. It's but, well, through you, it's your gift.
No,
thanks.
Happy for those comments to be made, so thank you very much for those, Councillor Hales. So we'll move on to the next. So before I move on, I think we've noted the report, we've reviewed it, we've made some recommendations between us. Everyone's happy that we've done that. So we will move on. I'll just bring up agenda item. So if we move on to agenda item 6, which is the peer review action plan update, pages 49 to 104. I was just going to take, I know this, revisions of this have been to the committee before, but I was going to just open it up to questions essentially. Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. Just bear with me because I'm orientating myself. I want to go to page 53, straight into the action list. Page 53. And I just want to start with a brief anecdote. So, certain parish council, I'm telling them that there was this excellent workshop which was held today here, I believe, for parish chairs to be briefed on planning process, and I did get a blank look, and then no recognition, and then a dawning recognition. Unfortunately, the particular chair in question wasn't able to attend, so I wouldn't want to extend that anecdote, to generalise it, and I hope there was a good turnout today. But we are having some difficulties, I think. We promote stuff like, the parish council needs to be really engaged with the planning process, and for bigger projects with intricacies and knowing how to comment and where to comment, that's really important. So I'm just wondering, in this process of perhaps building better, more acute relationships with parish councils, members might just improve their game. And this is a comment as much to me. So when I look back through the e-bulletins, now I have to say that the e-bulletins to parishes are excellent, and they're getting better. And so the latest in the sway format is very good. But is there a way, so here's my question, is there a way for members who are going to mentor parish councils in some of these things to just be more kind of on the ball, apart from reading the e-bulletins, which I have to confess I need to do more, in more detail. So how can we be better members in regard to engaging parish councils on important issues?
Thank you. Councillor Bridget Smith.
Thank you. So that wasn't quite the question I was expecting to hear from you. I thought you were going to say, how can we get better at communicating directly with parish councils to make sure that they get all these invites and so on. But I think you make a very good point about how we as local members have a responsibility, as well as the sort of conduit between the council and our parish councils, to make sure that they are taking full advantage of all the stuff we offer them. Now, at the last parish liaison meeting, there was an interesting mix of both small and large parish councils, and quite a lot of parish clerks there. And we had an interesting conversation from some of the clerks in smaller parish councils complaining about the amount of stuff we sent them, and some of the ones in the bigger parish councils complaining that they didn't get enough from us. So we can't filter information to our parish councils based on their size, because information that has to go out from us to parish councils needs to go to everybody equitably. I think there is a conversation for perhaps some members to facilitate with their parish councils about, do the clerks have enough time in order to do their jobs? Because being a parish clerk is quite a big job, and the workload isn't that different whether you're in a small parish council or a big parish council. You're still dealing with all the same amount of paperwork coming in. So I think it's important. I mean, it's great that local members want to help and make sure all these messages are being picked up. But I think there is, what might be a tricky conversation with some parish councils about making sure that actually they are giving their clerks every opportunity to do their jobs as efficiently as they possibly can, because we're offering loads of stuff, and it's really frustrating when I think of the last parish liaison meeting, it wasn't a very good turnout, quite honestly, and we'd laid on refreshments and so on, and horses to water comes to mind, but but it's good that you raised the issue about our responsibility to do our bit.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and I agree. Clerks have a huge role, actually, and it's a really difficult role. Councillor Stover.
Just to continue that discussion, perhaps with a brief comment. We perhaps know our parishes, or we think we know our parishes, but it would be great to have something highlighted to us, maybe from SCDC, say, well, your parish has expressed an interest in this or has this development going on, and therefore, could you just bring that up? And then we can highlight in the report, write a message to the chair, do that kind of stuff, just to highlight it. So a little bit of assistance from time to time might be helpful.
Yeah. So, Councillor Smith, more individualised messaging.
Yeah, okay. So you should get notification of planning of major planning applications. You should get notification of. So you should that should be happening. I'm sure you don't want to know about every garage extension because we all get far too many emails as it is. So I think that process is in place. And I'm pretty sure through Liz's weekly bulletin, we highlight in that what's coming up. So when it's the parish liaison meeting, when there's, events like there was today, where they had lots of biscuits, I noticed when I walked past. I think we are made aware of that as well. So it's a balance between spoon feeding people and letting people access all that information themselves.
Councillor Stover.
Yeah, I fully recognise that, and of course we do get notified of planning applications. I'm just thinking, you know, a prod to mention something. I mean, we get grant schemes coming through all the time, and to give the parish council like 2 months warning would be great, and then we can encourage them, and it all seems perfectly reasonable. But it's like 2 weeks, you know, it's no longer on the table.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I think that's noted. Lovely. Okay, so we'll come to. Have you got another point, Councillor Stobart?
I have a second question, but I don't want to steal the committee's airtime.
Do it now, and
okay.
I'll come to Councillor Hales afterwards. Yeah.
So could I just go to page 58 and recommendation number 4, and it says ensure report recommendations, evidence driven, etc. Training delivered on the 23rd of January, action complete. Well, not really. The action isn't complete until perhaps we're sure that that training's got embedded, and we've done, you know, a 6-monthly or an annual review to say, are we performing better? I just wonder if, I just get a slight impression with this set of recommendations that we've kind of taken a run at them. And wouldn't it be better if we were reflecting more on the culture that we're trying to bring about? And I think where there's training like this, it behoves us, I think, to ask the question, well, has it sunk in? And are the performance measures we're anticipating through that training, you know, becoming clear in the next 6 months and the next 12 months? So there are 1 or 2 places here, and yeah. I think, you know, I'd just like to hear a comment on, you know, how do we put that in place and how do we review it? Yeah.
Councillor Bridget Smith. Oh, you're muted, Councillor Smith.
Sorry, it's been a very long day. Right, the recommendation was to develop a to create a member development plan. So we have done that. We can support members in their roles through training, but we can't make them go to the training, and we can't make members go to the briefings and so on and so forth. And we all have busy lives, and I think we have to be pragmatic about this. You know, there is some training that is mandated for members of licensing and planning in particular. So, you know, we can insist on that. But a bit like, you know, parish councils and so on, we can't drag people kicking and screaming. So we just have to make sure that everything's well advertised at times at which it's convenient for members. I think we quite often video stuff so that, you know, film stuff, so people can then pick it up later if they haven't actually been able to attend. So I think we have fulfilled the recommendation, which was to develop this member development plan, and we will be reviewing the plan regularly to make sure that it is a plan that is meeting members' needs. What we can't do is make people participate, but I hope they will, because it's all very interesting, and every day is a learning opportunity as a councillor.
Councillor Stobart.
Leader, thank you for that feedback, but I was actually commenting on the early point recommendation 4, which was, I think, training for officers, and, you know, was vitally important, you know, council function concerning robustness of data and information. So, but it was more a general comment. Is where we are training, we would like to know that the training is delivering. Perfectly accept what you've said, Leader, on member training, but this was the preceding item about data.
Fine. My apologies. Yeah. My apologies. As I said, I think I've been. Yeah, that's fine. This is my 12th meeting. I started at 8 o'clock this morning, so cut me. You'll have to cut me some slack if I'm going off the boil here. Yes. So, you know, again, training has been delivered, and I'm sure, you know, this is operational. I'm sure Liz and her team have this very closely monitored.
Thank you. Councillor Hales, please.
Thank you, Chair. A slight curved ball, if you like. Some of us might remember a gentleman in the planning team called John Cock, Principal Planning Officer. We keep hearing this thing about parish councils not quite understanding some of the planning ways, what have you, of the dark art of planning. We see the wizards over here and here. We arranged some training, actually, that South Cambs planning officers delivered to parish councils local to Melbourne. It was like a nice posh lunch, and John Cock delivered it, and it was really well received by those councillors. I just wondered if there's any mileage in that actually going alongside what Richard's been demonstrating this evening with regards to officers and us. It does help if the target audience knows what they're talking about as well. So, it might be something that we could consider. And it wasn't anything that South Cambs picked up as a cost. I think there was a small cost for John, but it was only his time. And the parishes paid a percentage per head cost of the room rent and the lunch, and obviously John Cock's time. So it was a small amount for training, if you like, but it was gold plated, frankly, and there was stuff to take away as well. There was handouts. It was brilliant.
Okay.
So it might be something we can consider. Something else for the planners to do if they've got nothing else to do.
So I'm just going to, very briefly, Bridget Smith, then I'll bring Stephen Kelly in, and then Heather Williams just wants to make a point on that.
That's fine. So yeah, I mean, we try and be we try and be really, really responsive. And if people are telling us they need something specific, then, we bend over backwards to accommodate them. I'm very lucky. One of my parish clerks is an ex-planner. So, she's terrific. Many of them are.
Just to say, Councillor Hales, we are doing that now on a far more frequent basis. So we run a programme for, in fact, we've just had an event for parish clerks on how can we help you with the planning process. We've also, we also run a quarterly forum for parish councils to be able to assist them with planning related matters and new topics. And so we are doing that. We're clearly also asking those parishes what more we can do to help them.
Lovely, thank you for that. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you. Echoing what Councillor Hale said in relation to John Cox. So John and Julie were fantastic about coming out, and I know to your communities and what have you. And we had a similar one in my ward back in 2018. And because it was, I know it sounds strange, because it wasn't them coming to the council, it was something in the area that they were, it felt a lot more conversational, and it was a bit more informal. And I think for the parish councillors, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but it felt like the council was coming to their turf rather than them going. And I think so the location of it is really important. So I think if we could take that on board, but also one thing that always seems to get missed, not everywhere has a clerk, not everywhere is a parish council. We do have parish meetings. I think I've got 3 of them. I know they're rare in my patch. And can we not forget about those, please? Because they fall through the gaps, and often they're the ones that actually need the most support.
Lovely. I see some nod in there, so I think that's been noted and general consensus there. Councillor Drew.
Thank you. When we, as a committee, first reviewed the peer review and then the action plan that was in terms of it, I think it's fair to say that we were very robust in our response to this, and that we asked some very, very detailed and clear questions. And I remember that I specifically asked Councillor Smith whether or not it was the case that the council's both leadership in terms of the administration, the elected councillors and the senior officers took the matter seriously enough, and whether or not it was considered to be something that they definitely fully engaged with. And I based this in part on some of the things that were written in the report. So it is really good to see this report come back to us in terms of the progress that has been made. And even if I go past the colour-coded, this has been done, that has been done, or not done, or whatever, I can see that in the specific letter or report that the peer review team have written, it suggests a very different thing. So I suppose what I'd like to ask at this stage is if Councillor Smith can give us perhaps a summation, I don't know, 3 points or such like, that she feels that the peer review, the biggest impact it has had on the council's work up to this point. I know it's ongoing, but are there perhaps 3 things you could highlight to us where you feel that the council has reflected, reviewed, improved its activities based on the peer review, so that we know that, as it seems to be the case, it has definitely been taken on board?
Councillor Bridget Smith.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting. So I seem to remember sitting through about 3 hours grilling by Scrutiny and Overview on one of the recommendations. Was it recommendation 3? No, it wasn't 3. It was the one about a sort of community compact about an offer to communities. So that certainly really rammed it home with me that we had to take the recommendations that had come from the team extremely seriously, because Scrutiny was taking it extremely seriously and was very much acting as the mouthpiece of our residents. So these are serious pieces of work. You don't, and a huge amount of preparation had to go into it in advance. So we did take it seriously, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable at times. When they came back for the follow-up, actually that was just completely different, because they were really impressed with the speed at which we'd done stuff, because a lot of it had already been done by them, the robustness of our action plan. So it was all a bit of a sort of pat on the back exercise when they came back. But I think with the added incentive from Scrutiny, that the fact that we've improved our engagement with communities, and we now have a really exciting work stream about what our offer is to our communities. So I think that's the most significant thing. Some of it was a bit more tweaking around the edges. They said, it surprised me that they said that people didn't really understand what our vision was, because I thought, I know what our vision is, of course everyone else knows, and it was just a matter of articulating it in an easy to understand way at the beginning of our corporate plan. So that was quite an easy nut to crack, but I think if they hadn't told me that's what was needed, I probably wouldn't have realised that's what's needed. And we've now done this extra piece of work on values and so on, which is reflected in those nice posters around the organisation. And yeah, so the community strategy, I think, is the main thing. And I think there is some work which is more sort of behind the scenes on transformation, and kind of getting better at articulating it within our organisation, but also with all those partners who we work with as well. So yes, like many things, hindsight's a marvellous thing, and absolutely all worthwhile and very valuable with hindsight, but a bit challenging when we're in the middle of it.
Marvellous. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got no other speakers on this item. So I think we have reviewed and noted the report and made some comments on that. So we will now move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 7, the accommodation needs assessment. And we've got the review that's been presented to us on page is 105 to 224. So I will start by taking questions on this. I might go myself first, actually. I'm going to struggle getting page numbers up, but just generally in the report, we see that there is a clear need that is presented for additional pitches over the coming decades. And we also see that we have current pitches, that some of which are not occupied by the travelling community. So I just wanted to see if the lead member could comment on what we would be doing as a council to allocate some of that need within our current pitches by rectifying that situation, and also then think about the homelessness impact that might result of the repercussions of that. So if I bring in John first on this, Councillor Batchelor. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much, Chair. This obviously is quite a sensitive
Agreed.
subject, and I'm not sure quite how much detail I should go into it in
I think
the
just a
public
general
sphere.
direction. Yeah.
Yes, all right. So we have a legal obligation to actually enforce the planning rules on these sites. The intention is that we will comply with that in due course. Yeah, I'm happy for members to have more detail on that, but not in the public sphere.
Thank you for that. Julie, did you want to come in on that as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to sort of say, so there's been around 70 pitches have been identified within the study that are being occupied by non-gypsies and travellers. We have, as part of our report, which will be going to Cabinet, an action plan. So at page 220, we're talking about sort of enforcement action in terms of those 70 pitches, if indeed they are occupied by non-gypsies and travellers. So I think, to be clear, really, that's the beginning of a journey, I think, in terms of understanding who are actually residing with on those pitches. This is the very first step, I think, in terms of a lot more investigative work that we will need to do as a council in terms of determining that there's evidence that these people living on those sites are not gypsies and travellers. So there is a huge amount of work to do in that respect in terms of just making sure that actually they are not gypsies and travellers and then really don't have a right to live on those sites. So that piece of work will start and we will work with different colleagues within the council in terms of making sure that, you know, some of these people may be quite vulnerable, even if they haven't got permission to actually reside on those sites, they may need support with accommodation, either be that through the homelessness route or through giving them advice and support to find alternative accommodation. So it's a huge piece of work, but it's something that we can't ignore. It's been flagged up by the consultants as something that we've got to pursue further and see where we get to, really. And I think by starting that work, you know, things may change anyway in terms of where we end up.
Perfect, thank you for that. I'm just going to ask a second point, and that is around sort of healthcare provision for the travelling community. We sometimes see illegal or illegal encampments where some of the travelling community have certain health conditions that mean that they need a course of treatment. So they might need 6 weeks of radiotherapy, for example. And the report sort of alludes to how we might accommodate some of that. So really my question is around what conversations might we have with the NHS and healthcare providers if we were to think about temporary sites or permanent sites to help facilitate healthcare, because, you know, like the general population, the travelling community can also, move to where they think their treatment will be delivered best, and that might be Hospital X and pitch up illegally or legally in close proximity to that hospital. So if we are to provide temporary or permanent sites around hospital sites, what conversations would need to be had in terms of patient numbers and so forth? John, Councillor Batchelor, shall I start with you and then...
Yes, thanks very much. Yes, we have been discussing this, and we would hope with the new developments going on the campus at Adam Brooks that will be taken into account. The consultants have suggested that that there isn't a need for transit accommodation, but certainly our partners in the city probably think differently to that. So there is a conversation to be had with the campus and with planning. Obviously, this all feeds into the local plan, and I think that's something that we most certainly should be providing.
Thank you. Cheers. Julie Fletcher.
Thank you. If I may add to that, I think one of the things that we've struggled with as part of the study is getting some real sort of evidence-based, factual evidence. So I think from what the study has said, it's sort of anecdotal sort of evidence that people have heard, or the other so and so sort of, it's because they've got someone in hospital, etc. So one of the things we want to do is try and collect more data, and I definitely think trying to work with the NHS is one area that we need to pursue more in terms of whether they actually collect data in terms of gypsies and travellers and use that data. So I think there are conversations to have there in terms of the NHS. In terms of, if I made transit sites and stopping places, transit sites I think nationally don't particularly work because of their very nature. People will travel to them and then they end up staying and then they become permanent sites. So I think nationally the move is away from that and more temporary stopping places. So it's more about allowing someone to stop, maybe in the field, wherever, maybe with bins or toilet portaloos going in at a certain point to allow them to stay for a couple of weeks, etc. So I think we would be looking more at sort of temporary stopping places. We are in conversations, I think, with some of the big developers in terms of any big sites coming forward, and we will continue to have those conversations.
And I think that's a very relevant point. I think some of my patients who have needed consecutive treatments have been on illegal encampments. It's very difficult sometimes to work with those patients if they're at danger of being, maybe rightly moved on from whichever site they're currently occupying. So I think, for us, where some of our patients need a course of treatment over a period of time, it just, some thought around, working with healthcare providers to say, to have some sort of dispensation to stop in transit for a period of time would be a useful thing. But I accept your point. I think that's, that's good. Okay, so Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. I was expecting to come further down in the queue, but here goes. Could I just comment on the report, which I think is excellent, and it's presented well. I mean, it's very number dense, but it is full of content. I think the accompanying presentation, which was given at the briefing on Monday, is also worth a look to get a good oversight of things. So while it's numbers and it appears to be a snapshot, actually it's a little more complicated than that. But that was my first question. Is this a snapshot or a trend? And can we use the information that's presented as part of an understanding of how the travelling gypsy Roma community is actually working within Greater Cambridge? So that would be my first question.
Let's take that first. Councillor Batchelor.
Yes, thanks very much. Well, it's not a snapshot. It's hopefully is a comprehensive assessment of the current situation. What it's saying is that there's 65 sites and 390 pitches currently, and projecting that. I mean, we're very pleased with the report. You may be aware or not that this is the second attempt that we've had at this needs survey. The first one we attempted last year didn't get very far, but these consultants have been much more diligent and been on the sites many, many times and actually properly interviewed people and so on. So we're confident of the validity of their numbers and so on. And from the point of view of what's actually needed, it's suggested that we need another 130 sites over the next 18 to 20 years, most of which they suggest can be found on existing sites by adding 2 or 3 pitches to each one. So, you know, it's not a snapshot. Hopefully it's a solid piece of work. And as Julie was saying, we've now commissioned them to go into more detail in some aspects of it so that we can make our forward plan.
Lovely. Councillor Stobart.
Yes, I didn't mean to diminish the status of the report by using the term snapshot of it. Snapshot might be the situation now, but very comprehensive. But I think you've filled in some of the detail to say, well, actually, there is a projection. But I'm wondering, and I think Julie just mentioned the idea. Sorry, I should be addressing you, Chair. So Julie just mentioned that there will be sources of data which help understand, particularly where the unauthorised pitching goes on. But are there wider possibilities which would allow us, in a sense, to predict demand and to understand where travelling communities were going? And you know, it's quite possible that as Cambridge grows and changes, and you know, stuff will happen in Cambridge, which actually undermines or is contrary to our original assumptions. So can we pick that up and actually act on it as it's developing? So is that a possibility?
Councillor Batchelor.
Yes, well, that's certainly the purpose of this and what we are planning to do. I'm not too sure what more I can say on that. Peter has reappeared. I don't know if he wanted to contribute to that.
That's reasonable. Peter Campbell.
Yes, so the needs does already contain a number of projections within it. So the need is the need over the next 10 years. So that's for the permanent sites. And what we're also proposing within the action plan is a series of action to understand what the need is for temporary stopping places, which will involve sharing intelligence between ourselves, the city and the county council, plus other partners, to understand exactly what that need is, if any, in terms of numbers, location, facilities, etc.
Okay. Councillor Stobart, do you want to follow up on that?
Could I just make one final point?
Yeah.
I have some other things, but if we just on this particular point. So, yeah, better collection of data, you know, gives us the opportunity to identify geographically and time-wise how how the travelling community is actually kind of behaving, or using the spaces that are available. I just wanted to this final thing, and then please do come back to me later. I think one of the issues that came up, it certainly did during the discussion after Monday's presentation, was the friction that sometimes arises between where travellers visit and the adjacent communities. And I wondered, this report is very kind of factual and numbers. On the community side, how are we balancing this kind of understanding of the situation with how we react to the people, and ensuring that communities are doing our best to make sure the community and the traveller groups which live nearby can actually peacefully and happily coexist during the time that the travellers are there, for however long it might be. So is there some community activity that we can get engaged with?
Councillor Batchelor.
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, it's not that easy, is it? No. There has to be cooperation on both sides, and that we have to say has been largely lacking up till now. I mean, communications is very difficult indeed. We have a specialist team who do work with the travelling community all the time. So, you know, we do have information and so on, but it's not as deep as one might like.
Peter Campbell, did you also want to come in there?
Yeah, I just want to differentiate here, because there were some points that were raised at the members' briefing earlier this week, and it's very clear that the ourselves and the city are in very different positions. So a lot of concerns came from city councillors who are concerned about who have no permanent sites within their area, that the impact of the illegal encampments have on the general public. So we have a very different situation here, and indeed we hope that we are significantly more rural than they are. And we work very closely with the police and county council, etc. That if there is a unauthorised temporary encampment, that we get there and investigate the needs of those of that group of people very quickly, and take appropriate action to move them on, or to try and find somewhere else for them to go locally and informally.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stobart.
I mean, that covers, you know, Peter's comments cover, you know, a situation where there's an illegal encampment, but I'm thinking of, you know, where things are perhaps legal and proper, according to you know, the kind of considerations we've been looking at here. Yeah. But how to get a better relationship, a more trusting relationship.
So I think that's been noted, that, you know, the work will continue on that by Councillor Batchelor's team. Yeah. Councillor Drew.
Thank you. There are obviously many questions specifically related to the contents of the report, and I can see, as the person who writes down, that many colleagues will ask those. What I wanted to ask actually was a sort of wider question related to the work of the council in terms of supporting Gypsy, Roma and travellers as a minority. And one of the things that we quite rightly do as a council is that we celebrate Black History Month, for instance, and we also will often arrive as members and staff to the council offices, and we will see various flags being flown outside of the council building, celebrating various days and such like. And I am left thinking to myself that actually, as Councillor Batchelor said at the start, this is inherently a difficult topic. This is inherently something that causes a lot of thought and causes us to have to think very clearly about what our responsibilities are. And I just wonder what the District Council feels that it does to promote positively the contribution of Gypsy and Roma and traveller groups to the South Cambridgeshire community. Because although obviously on some occasions we are talking about people coming to transit sites and moving on, we're also talking about a group of people who are part of our wider community. And I note, for instance, that June is Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Month. And I also notice that April the 8th is International Romany Day, for instance. And I wonder whether or not the council would consider positively promoting the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Month, for instance, in the way that it would Black History Month. The council has publications, the council has website and such like. And I think that it can only help the work that we do in relation to this specific community if perhaps we are seen to positively promote those things as well. I did have to look it up this evening because I must confess my ignorance in that regard. There is a specific flag related to International Romany Day for the 8th of April. So I wonder whether or not the council would consider flying the flag on International Romany Day, for instance, because we are obviously quite rightly proud to do so for many other groups in society. We fly the Union Jack outside as our nation's flag, and I wonder whether or not some positive action, and if we were to take that and then work with organisations related to Roma, Gypsies and Travellers, that might actually help us with the work that we are doing in relation to the details of the report.
Councillor Batchelor.
Yes, Councillor Drew, I think you're perfectly right, and we can do much more in that context. We are looking at doing something in the future, and I know from my own experience in the past, we have had briefings from the traveller community here, which I found certainly very useful, because there's a lot of misunderstanding on both sides, possibly, in this area. So, yes, I'm perfectly happy to take up your suggestion, and we look what we can do there.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy for that to be the end of the answer. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bear Park, are we next? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have a couple of points on the action plan. So just on action number 2, it says provide 6 monthly progress reports to the leadership team, and I think the lead on that is Peter Campbell. I suppose it would have been nice to have seen a little bit of detail there in terms of recommendations by the consultants about what Peter Campbell was going to report on. But Peter may be very happy with that as an action and know exactly what he's going to report on. So, but you know, it could have done with a bit more detail, I think, in there.
Should we take that point first quickly? Shall I go over to Peter Campbell? Yeah, Peter Campbell.
Sorry, my screen froze just as you passed over them. Sorry about that. Yeah, good point. So this is specifically on the progress over the actions on the enforcement and ensuring that the sites are put to the use for which they have planning permission. And the reason why it's that frequency is to in recognition that enforcement action, especially planning enforcement action, is notoriously long-winded, and it's unlikely to be much progress much more frequently than every 6 months.
Okay, thank you very much. That leads in nicely to my second question, which is obviously one of the clear recommendations from this report was that if the sites where people who are not Gypsy, Roma, or Traveller are on these sites, that would increase the capacity of these sites. And it all comes under enforcement action. And I suppose I'd be interested to see a bit more carrot than stick in this. So I suppose starting with understanding whether the people that are on these sites are included in housing needs assessments, for instance. And I don't know for sure, but I would have thought it's more, you're going to make more progress with this by trying to find alternative accommodation than evicting people. But that's my view. I don't know.
Councillor Batchelor.
That's a tricky one, so I'm going to leave Peter to respond to it.
Peter Campbell.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Beppart, you're exactly right. The intention is a carrot and stick approach, and what we like at the end of the day was all the sites within the district to be well run and licensed and be of good quality. There will be an estimation of the needs of the non-travellers in any housing needs study. But of course, I mean, this report is the housing needs study in effect for people who are caravan dwellers, i.e. this is that they want caravan plots. They're not looking, the majority of them are not looking for permanent accommodation. And what we've also realised is that so we're compelled to take action to make sure that the sites are used properly. That may mean that some people are displaced, and we will need to make sure that our housing needs colleagues are involved with that process. If we chose not to take that sort of action, however, we would be obliged to try and find an equal number of sites on number of plots on newly developed sites. And we have, in the past, when efforts have made, that has been much more difficult than rationalising the use of existing sites. So that's why the consultants are suggesting that this is an appropriate way forward.
Thank you for that. I think that's a point well made. Is that okay, Councillor Bear?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. I do understand that there need to be kind of complementary actions.
Balance, yeah. Okay. Councillor Earl, please.
Yes, I've just noticed some of the dates on page 219 were quite soon, like next month. And if they were realistic, December 2024 and January 2025, and item number 11, for example, which is another January 2025. They seem very close. Are they realistic?
Councillor Batchelor.
I'm sorry, what page was that one?
219.
219, right. Let me just
Regularising sites, existing sites, and then
Appendix B.
joint protocol regarding enforcement, for instance, they're actually quite tight.
Right, 219.
Julie Fletcher, do you want to come in?
Sorry, I've got the wrong number. 219, is that?
Yeah, page
Appendix
219.
Okay.
Julie, you come in
Sorry,
first
my numbers
whilst
have gone all
Councillor Batchelor.
Yeah. I think I have
Would
another
you
go
like
at
me
that.
to answer Councillor Batchelor on that point?
Yeah, you got it there.
Yeah.
Go on, Julie.
So you're right, some of them are quite sort of soon, but we do feel that they are doable. So some of them are quite short in terms of the 6 monthly report. I think that's around just seeing where we are at the moment, because we have actually started work on some of these actions. So it's just keeping that momentum going. So I think that is realistic that we do a report for the April to December in terms of where we are, because even as the report's been produced, we know, for example, there's a need for 17 show people plots. We have since then given planning permission for, I think, 8 plots. So we have moved on a bit. So I think it's just sort of looking at that to see where we are now. The other big one, which you mentioned, was the work that we've asked the consultants to do, which is to do a sort of a site appraisal of some of the sites where they've identified potential extension or intensification. So they're doing that now. They're working on that, and their deadline is to get us a report by the end of December. So we do believe that is achievable.
I think that's reassuring. Councillor Earl, is that okay?
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just very glad to see this report. We've waited a long time for it, and I know it was difficult with the previous researchers, but this is an excellent report, and thank you very much for bringing it to us, should I say. I just want to concentrate on the conclusions and recommendations. And, well, a couple of things first. One is a question, and obviously we know that caravans, the legislation around caravans relates to both caravans and mobile homes and sites for both those. And so I just wanted to check, on page 195 of the agenda, at 11.13 of the conclusions and recommendations, I just wanted to check whether, under the heading residential caravan parks, whether that refers only to residential caravan parks which are registered for gypsy and travellers, or if that refers to all residential caravan parks. I was wondering if somebody can answer that question first.
Councillor Batchelor.
I believe these are private caravan parks and not registered as gypsy and traveller sites.
So this statement.
These are just commercial caravan parks.
Right. Thank you. So I'm concerned about the recommendation. I mean, I can absolutely, sites that are authorised for gypsy and travellers, and so the recommendation to ensure that pitches within sites are used for gypsy and travellers and not for non-gypsies and travellers. This is at 11.4, quotes, making pitches on existing sites available for occupancy by gypsies or travellers. This is a reasonable suggestion, looking at the numbers, but actually there are problems with that because the communities who live there are, as you'll know, there are many different groups within travellers, and so some of these pitches would not easily accommodate people from another group than currently live there. So I won't go into more detail than that because I'm sure you understand, although you're looking puzzled. For example, I'll just give you a straightforward example. What we might loosely call English travellers would not necessarily welcome Irish travellers in the same community. Yeah, so we just need to be careful about that. So that's one sort of question, how are we going to handle that? And the other thing is that, as Councillor Bear Park alluded to, if you do that, remove the people who are on the site but are not gypsies and travellers, and in order that those sites are available, pitches are available for gypsies and travellers, then what do you do with the people who are now homeless? You know, we need to make provision elsewhere for them. So that's a second question. How do we
Let's take those 2 points first, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks very much.
Councillor Batchelor.
So we've identified 70 sites which are occupied by or identified as non-traveller. As part of the current work, we're trying to confirm precisely who they are. This is not an easy process, as you might imagine, and so we're waiting on some more information there. And what was your first element?
The first one, well, the question was answered about what the residential car parking, sorry, what the residential caravan parks
I think
were.
that covers it, really. So,
but it's a recognition that you can't just say, well, they're gypsies and travellers and you can put them in the same place because they won't necessarily get on with each other.
I mean, it's quite possible that these are vulnerable people that need other support anyway. Well, suspicion would be that they're outside of the official circuit anyway, but I can't go into too much about that.
Okay. Come on to your next point, Councillor Bratton.
So what I will just comment back on that is that I know that in our ward, we have one of the biggest traveller communities in the country, in Milton and Waterbeach ward. And so I'm very aware of the problems that exist. And what I'm aware of is that one of the problems is the difficulty of tracing landowners sometimes. And I appreciate that's a very difficult job. And I just wanted to thank the officers for the research company for actually exploring that as much as they can. But I recognise this still remains a difficult problem. And I note that one of the sites in my ward is not listed in the confidential appendix, and I suspect it's for that reason. But maybe I'll pick that up with officers later. So the other one is under 11.10 of the recommendations. There's it's recommended that the councils consider developing a flexible approach to unauthorised encampment activity using negotiated stopping arrangements. Now, this was a proposal from the police some years ago, but it relies on so often these unauthorised encampments are on land that's owned by either private individuals or parishes. Now, parishes actually don't own necessarily very much land, but the problem is it relies on the parish being able to identify alternative land that these unauthorised travellers, unauthorised encampment might go to. Now, in my experience, in the parishes, it's very difficult. The parishes are unlikely to have other land available to them.
Councillor Braddon, can you come to a question?
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm saying is I think that is unlikely to work as a solution because we've had experience of it, we've tried it in my village, it hasn't worked, and so
I think
it's been unsuccessful.
Councillor Batcher.
Yes, I agree entirely. Thank you. None of this is easy, is it? We can only do our best. But Peter is going to...
Peter Campbell.
Yeah, so just come back to Councillor Braddon's earlier point is that understanding the needs of the other of the people who are living in caravans who aren't travellers. So this piece of work is very specifically a needs assessment for gypsies and travellers. It's identified the people, there are people who are living on the site who aren't travellers, but identified their housing needs was outside the scope of this report, and we recognise that that's an additional piece of work that we need to do to understand what their situation, what their housing requirements are. So accept that that is something that was never intended to be part of this report, but has the need has been triggered by the completion. So then just moving on to negotiated stopping places, it's not that all this, we will be looking at land which is just owned by parishes. In fact, we've been quite successful in the past in negotiations by working with the county council, and particularly their highways service, who have access to swathes of land across the district, and that's actually been very successful. So if there is a group of travellers who are in an unauthorised site, we'd go out and make an assessment, and that's that's usually Stevie, our dedicated officer, or myself will do that. We may take action against them, but when appropriate, we will work with the county council and other colleagues to try and find them an alternative, more appropriate site to move the vans to, and that has worked.
Thank you for that. Councillor Braddon.
Thank you, Chair. I also just wanted to point out that no, I'll leave that other point. Thank you very much for the work that's been done, but and I appreciate it's extremely tricky and it's a very sensitive issue and it's difficult to get the data. So thank you.
Councillor Braddon. Lovely. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I hope members will, while the stamina of the members keeps going, my laptop hasn't, so I might not have all the page references that you need. So apologies for that in advance. It's language, I think we sort of, through this conversation and this scrutiny, language is so important. And I think that's important, not just in this, but subject, but in many others as well. So one thing that I just wanted to reflect on was, throughout the report it says about having flexible approaches, but I think that you can be flexible but consistent, and I do think consistency is important as well. So you can be flexible to someone's personal situation. For example, if they have a healthcare issue, so you give the flexibility of that, but you would be consistent to in every case if there was a healthcare issue. So I think that language is important, because equally as well, we need to ensure that everybody feels like the rules will be applied fairly. So that was one thing. It felt like it could just be very ad hoc from the wording and language. The other question is that the analysis has been done, and it's a great piece of work, as I was just said, but when we come through planning committee, quite often planning permissions are given to a family, very unique, because ownership and the occupants not normally an issue in planning. So I'm just wondering if that's been taken into consideration. Are there any sites that potentially will expire if a family's moving on, or would it be something that could be changed in transition? Because I appreciate in this area of planning it's a bit different. And just finally, references about the city, about encampments, but we know actually from the council here, it's quite a regular situation to have encampments in Camborne, and I'm sure there's other areas. So I take it we're looking to see where trends are, because that would then help us to identify where provision was most likely needed. So just a couple of comments, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Batchelor.
Yes, thanks. On the question of flexibility and fairness, yeah, we're always trying to do that. But we also have legal obligations as well. So that has to be in the balance. Where they stop at the moment isn't necessarily an indication of where the best place would be for a transit stop or whatever, because simply they're stopping in places where they have the opportunity to do so. They don't necessarily choose somewhere, other than perhaps what we touched on earlier about those, with the hospital and so on. But you've always got the difficulty of having the knowledge of what's actually really going on. If people don't cooperate, then it's very difficult to actually help, which is basically what we're here for. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Heather Williams.
Yes, thank you. And I do appreciate that, like everything, communication is a two-way street, and it's a dialogue. I think that Councillor Batchelor has referenced the things about the language and the sites, but not quite about the planning restrictions. If we have Mr. Kelly, perhaps could give us some flesh on that.
Stephen Kelly.
Thank you. With every application that we get for where people claim that they are from a Gypsy and Mona background, we aim to undertake and we provide a needs assessment for them to complete the form. There's a standard form that helps us to identify any specific characteristics or considerations that they ask us to have regard to. Clearly, we then need to weigh every case on its merits. There are the personal circumstance of the families, as members may well be aware, have in some cases warranted either temporary planning permissions or whilst particular circumstances within that family are resolved. But obviously there is a requirement in the Planning Act to treat applications in a certain way having regard to your local plan. So we follow a consistent approach of seeking information. We can't require that information to be submitted, and so therefore we then make a judgment based upon the material that we have in front of us. But we aim to be consistent.
Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you. So just as you say, sometimes there are temporary sites, but it's also when we have a site can be specified for the use of that person's family. And that's sort of my question is, how is that feeding it? Because we can count the sites, but then there might be restrictions like family links that are required through planning, and how is that being incorporated?
I mean, Peter might want to comment, but the purpose of the study is to identify the pitches, and I think that's the work that's ongoing at the moment. Where there are personal permissions, I think there's a view to be taken following the assessment that's being done at the moment of the sites as to whether or not the sites are suitable or appropriate for any other occupancy, or indeed if they're being occupied inappropriately. That's something that we need to investigate and then consider the planning case for it. Where there are personal permissions, generally the planning inspectors, or generally it's planning inspectors, but the planning process has determined that there isn't an argument for the permission overall, and it's often the personal circumstances that have determined whether or not permission for a temporary period is granted. So it's the specific circumstances, and clearly, rather than just flip those into general use sites, we clearly need to have regard to whether any circumstances have changed.
Okay, I think that's clear. Okay. So, Councillor Braddon, did you want to come in on this point briefly? Yeah? It's a different point. I'll bring you in at the end. So I've got two further speakers. I've got Councillor Stobart, Councillor Braddon. If you could both be fairly brief, just because I'm conscious of the time. Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, I'll be super brief, Chair, thank you. Just dwelling for a moment on residential caravans and boats. There was some comment, I think, that residential caravans were, the kind of median age of residents was 55, but that's not necessarily the case. My experience is in Waterbeach, and the demographic tends to be younger, and those using houseboats, for example, tend to be young. So
that's my understanding. The demographic was lower, but I'll Councillor Batchelor. I should answer him. Yeah.
Well, this is the boat people we're talking about.
No, and the residential caravans.
Oh, residential caravans. Depends where you are, I think. But an interesting, well, all right, perhaps I won't go into that. But I don't know. Do you know, Julie?
Julie Fletcher.
Thank you. Just quickly, I think it does depend on the site, but I do know that there are quite a few sites that are restricted to a certain age. So therefore the demographic for the residential parts is probably older overall. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, that was just a comment against the data. So it is quite variable, and I mean, quite a number of those residential caravan parks are in Waterbeach. I think there are 4 out of the 11 in the district. So maybe that says something about Waterbeach, but we won't dwell on that. Just one thing, there are others in the community who are interested in Gypsy Roma Traveller communities. I was just thinking of, there was quite a discussion about sanctuary stops and the Church of England's interest. The Church of England's interest is wider than simply sanctuary stops. I'm aware of quite a wide range of activity. And I was wondering whether there are other kind of voluntary groups, charity groups, faith groups who were interested to be involved. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Batchelor.
Yes, we're perfectly happy to consider any options. I heard the sanctuary business as well, which is all well and good, but I can imagine there'll be some difficulty with neighbours to the churches. It's not that easy. And if I could just say that, you know, we're setting out on a road here.
Yeah.
Up until the end of last year, the government had a definition of travellers, which meant that you can't be a traveller unless you're travelling. Yeah, on that basis, we had no need for any further pitches.
Yeah.
That changed in December 23, and you know we're in a different situation, and we're trying to adjust to it. So it will take a little time.
Noted. Yeah. Councillor Stobart.
That's fine.
Thank you.
That's my...
Councillor Braddon.
Thank you. It leads on from something Councillor Stobart said earlier. And I know that this is
you know, an accommodation needs assessment of gypsies, travellers, travelling show people and bargee travellers and other caravan and houseboat dwellers. I know it's an assessment of their needs, but in its application and in its recommendations, I do wonder if somehow, maybe not as part of this document, because this is an excellent piece of work, but in its application, some acknowledgement needs to be given to the impact of illegal encampments and registered encampments on the surrounding community. And I don't know how that would be done, but what I'm very aware is that somehow, somewhere along the line, because this is a needs assessment for the traveller community, I recognise that there are needs that need to be fulfilled for them, and we have an obligation as a county, as a district council, to make provision as necessary. But somewhere along the line, we need to take account of the impact.
The impact. Councillor Batchelor.
I agree entirely, but that's not the remit for this particular document.
So is there a remit somewhere for that?
Councillor Batchelor.
Well, we're always, it's difficult, isn't it? How you said yourself you didn't know how one would do that, and I don't know either. Because, you know, it could affect anybody or everybody. It depends where, you know, events occur, doesn't it?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We don't have any other speakers on this item, so I think if we look at the recommendation, we have noted the report and reviewed it accordingly, if everyone's happy that we've done that. So we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, which I believe is the work programme, and that is pages 225 to 242. So I'm just seeing if anyone's got any comments on that at all. The Vice Chair and myself and Ian review it, and we have the triangulation meetings with members of the Cabinet as well to sort of keep that up to date and keep it with things that are relevant. Obviously, if members do have things that they want to bring to scrutiny, they can contact Councillor Drew, myself or Ian, you know, between meetings. If there are no questions on that, we will move. Councillor Bradman.
Just a quick one. I'm very glad to see that some time after June 2025, well, I'm not glad to see it there, but I'm glad to see that we're going to do an impact of the civil parking enforcement scheme.
Agreed.
And I just wondered, can we understand whether that is approximately a year from when it started? So this would be an annual review.
It would be approximately a year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We'd hope to have it a little bit sooner than that, but
yes, exactly.
we're still working on bringing that to you. So, and I know Ian and Councillor Drew and myself have been working on that. So that brings us to the close of the meeting. Ian, there's nothing I've forgotten? No. Good. Thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.